Hi everybody, thanks for coming out on a Saturday night. It's fantastic to see you all here. This story really was invented by Watson. He actually knew the story, but he was not allowed to tell it because it was too shocking. In the 1880s and 90s when he was living with it, the world would have to go through another century before it could handle the incredible problems that this story raises. However, Monty Python took a shot at the giant rat of Sumatra sometime in the 70s or early 80s. And I was a little bit of a Sherlockian in those days, and I had just moved to Los Angeles and got my first job there as a typist, which is how I made my living for years and years and years. And so I was a word processing typist in a law firm, and the very first day that I was at my job, there was no work. No work. And I found myself enraged thinking about the giant rat of Sumatra and how the Monty Python people had made it a laughing stock, when it was in truth a very serious story that Watson had told us about. And so I realized that the world was ready for it now. And literally I started typing at about 10 after 10 and I wrote the whole story in one day. So I was done about 10 after 4 and I said, this is going to be a great job. And in fact, it turned out to be how I made my living for the next 7 years. But this book was really written, this story was written on the very first day of that job. It was chosen by Sue Grafton as one of the best short stories of 1988. That's how old it is. And I'm just proud as heck that here all these years later, it's still relevant enough to have all of you here and hopefully be entertained by it. So the great J.R. Yancher is going to come up and read it brilliantly, I'm sure. J.R. and our children all played together as kids, and it's great to see us all be adults now. J.R., you're welcome. Come on up.
The Adventure of the Giant Rat of Sumatra. We were seated over breakfast, my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes deeply engrossed in his morning paper, when I heard him mutter something. "I beg your pardon, Holmes," I asked. "Sumatra. Sumatra, my God, even for Moriarty this is appalling. Holmes, what is it?" He put down the paper and looked in my direction, but he appeared not to see me. That in itself was so singular that I was immediately on my guard. When Sherlock Holmes looked, he saw. It was one of his dicta. But on that cold December morning in 1888, he stared as if through me, out to the drizzly fog that enshrouded London. I tried again to speak to him, but he waved me off impatiently. "Watson, please don't interrupt me. It may already be too late." Accustomed as I was to his outbursts, his tone still smarted. I started to remonstrate, but he had already risen and gone to the corner by the coal scuttle in our rooms at 221B Baker Street. There he kept his stack of past editions of London's newspapers. As I watched him in growing concern, he attacked the pile, throwing whole sections out behind him when they didn't contain that for which he was searching. Then, with an armload of papers, he half fell into his chair, grabbing his pipe on the way down. For the next quarter hour, he sat engulfed in tobacco smoke, muttering or cursing one moment, and then falling into a quiet and desperate depression. After watching him for a time, I ventured another syllable. "Holmes?" He flung some of the papers at me. "Read it for yourself, Watson. It may be the end of us all." I picked up the papers from the floor and began perusing them. Some were up to 2 years old, and I must confess I saw nothing in them but yesterday's news. Nevertheless, I slogged through the sections, pausing from time to time at a familiar name or at mention of a case in which Holmes and I had been involved. While I read, Holmes evidently finished his work and rang for Mrs. Hudson. When our landlady appeared, he sent her to fetch Billy the page, saying it was a matter of the utmost urgency. Quickly, he scratched the note on a pad, then, filling another pipe, turned to me as he lit it. "Well, Watson, I must say as a doctor you are calm enough about it." I must have looked at him blankly. "The plague, Watson, the plague. Can it be you don't see it?" Before I could respond, he had rushed to the table and snatched several of the papers away from me. "Look here, and here, and here. You see nothing? Nothing." He was grabbing and pulling the sections every which way. I had never seen him so agitated. "Holmes, there is no need to be rude." That brought him up short. He visibly summoned that control on which he prides himself, straightening himself to his full height, taking a deep breath. My dear man, please forgive me. It's nothing, Holmes, it's forgotten, but what is it? Please tell me. Looking at the door, he came to some decision. Well, I guess there is time before Billy comes. And he sat down, pulling that day's Times in front of him. Here, Watson, on page 5, the article on our old friend Colonel Sebastian Moran. I had read it, of course. The travels of the famous hunter were always of interest to me, both because they were often fascinating in themselves, but also, and not least, because of his position as Professor Moriarty's chief lieutenant. The article was an account of a Boer pirate attack on Moran's ship as it had been rounding the Horn on its return from Sumatra, loaded with hunting trophies. Moran and his crew had fought off the belligerents, hauled the injured ship back to Cape Town, and delivered it and its dead crew to the British authorities. A particular point of interest was that they had neither docked nor resupplied at port and had allowed no one to board their vessel. Well, it seems like a typical Moran adventure. By itself, you may be right, Watson. But what of this? He placed before me the obus of the newspapers and pointed to a piece on the outbreak of bubonic plague that had occurred 2 years before on Sumatra, a tiny island off the west coast of Sumatra. And these. The other articles related to a Dr. Culverton Smith, who had announced and then retracted the news that he had developed and hoped shortly to perfect a serum that would prevent and cure bubonic plague. I had just finished the last of these when there was a sharp rap at our door, followed immediately by the entrance into our quarters of Billy. One of the street urchins who frequented the alleys hereabouts, Billy had more than once proved a useful ally to my friend and me. Holmes wasted no time on greeting him, but handed him a note he'd scribbled earlier. Ah, Billy, here, deliver this at once to the address listed and wait there for a reply. Without a word, the boy was off, and I was again left alone with Holmes, pondering the obscure links in this bizarre chain. What is this about, Holmes? What was that note? Now that he had taken some action, he reverted to that languid pose I knew so well. His eyes had become so black they appeared nearly hooded. But this time there was none of that sparkle in them that always appeared after the view-halloo had been sounded, when the game was afoot. This time it was no game. The note was to a Dr. Culverton Smith, Watson, one of the most evil and brilliant men to ever grace your profession. He took a long pull at his pipe. I wondered how long it would be before Professor Moriarty and he made each other's acquaintance. I only wish I'd acted to prevent it. I only hope now I'm not too late. But what did the note say? He waved his pipe. Oh, it was prosaic enough. It said, England will pay you more than Moriarty. For what? For the serum, of course. The cure for bubonic plague. My God, Holmes, could it be? I don't know yet. I won't know for sure until Billy comes back. Halloo! That would be him now. He jumped up and ran to the door, opening it before the panting boy could even knock. Breathlessly, Billy handed a missive to Holmes, who ripped open the engraved envelope. As he read, his shoulders sagged. Absently, he forced some coins on Billy and rather unceremoniously shooed him out. I thought he was a little too brusque with the boy, and I told him so. Watson, it's as I suspected. Moriarty, Moran, and Culverton Smith are in it together, and no one must know. There would be panic. But what does the reply say? Holmes smiled, but with no humor. My dear Mr. Holmes, your offer is an interesting one. Unfortunately, what England can pay me is rather off the point, since within a year, my associates and I will be England. Holmes! Exactly. Moriarty plans to inoculate himself and his henchmen against the plague, then introduce the disease into England. But how would he do that? Probably through an animal that Moran has captured and smuggled onto his ship. The pieces were beginning to fit, though my own enlightenment had none of the epiphantic quality of Holmes's. But if they merely patented the serum, they would be millionaires many times over. Again, that frigid grin. Power, Watson. Power is more seductive than money, and for Moriarty it is everything. His mind envisions an England desolate and depopulated, but one where he is absolute ruler. a medieval king. The population not under his power, including you and me, my friend, would die in swollen, boil-infested agony. You shock me. Depend on it, Watson. I know my man. What can we do? Good old Watson. Where there is danger, you have no fear. Where courage is needed, you have no peer. It would be a good epitaph. The warmth I felt at the compliment quickly chilled at the vision of my own tomb. Still, what can be done? Within moments, I had my answer. I had been reading again, trying to piece together the disparate elements of this diabolical plot, when Holmes tapped my shoulder. I must have been deeply engrossed in my researches not to have noticed Holmes leave the room. But now he was back, dressed and bundled for an excursion. Get your coat, Watson. I think we should pay a visit to the Diogenes Club. The Diogenes Club was perhaps the strangest club in a city of strange clubs. Its members were the most private men in the city, and the charter and bylaws of the club colluded to keep them that way, since no one was allowed to speak within the club's walls. The sole exception being in the visitors' room, but even there, only whispering was permitted. After a bitterly cold ride in a hansom, we found ourselves before the forbidding double doors of the building. Inside, Holmes passed his card to the doorman, and we were ushered into the visitors' rooms to await the arrival of Holmes's brother, Mycroft. Mycroft's dour face and huge bulk surprised me anew, though I had met him once before during our adventure with the Greek interpreter. That episode had not ended happily, and I found myself praying that his intercession here would produce more positive results. He took me in at a glance, somehow included a welcoming nod, and turned to his brother, 12 years younger than himself. According to Holmes, Mycroft was the smartest and most powerful man in England. I reflected that his position, however it was defined, might be one that Moriarty would covet, but there was no more time for reflection. Sherlock, what brings you to these hermits' haunts? In a few words, Holmes outlined the situation. Hearing him retell it in its logical and orderly fashion, I was horrified again by the boldness and grandeur of Moriarty's twisted vision. Could he actually pull it off? As I watched and listened to Mycroft and his brother formulate their own plan, I had no doubt at all that if Moriarty could be stopped, only one man living could do it, and that was my friend Sherlock Holmes. 8 days later, Holmes and I paced the deck of the HMS Birmingham, the 28-gun flagship of the Atlantic Fleet. Early in the day, we had passed the Canaries, and now we were beating farther south in African waters. Holmes had estimated that we would meet up with Colonel Moran's ship somewhere near the latitude of Dakar, off the coast of French West Africa, and that would be another day or two's hard sail. The air was balmy, a far cry from the London winter. Some of the sailors had thought to bring a Christmas tree along, had tied it to the forward mast, decked it in red and green trimming, and even placed a few wrapped boxes under it for the effect. I couldn't help but admire the spirit of these men, facing Her Majesty's sometimes terrible tasks with dignity, honor, and even humor. This was an England worth fighting, even dying for. Of course, we were not alone. 26 ships of the line were arrayed in a crescent pattern out to the sides and behind us. Mycroft had persuaded an outraged Prime Minister to assign the convoy to try to blockade the oncoming vessel. It was the largest armada to be assembled since the Franco-Prussian War, and I hope it will be a long time before such a force is needed again. To get the kind of commitment needed for an expedition of this magnitude, Holmes had had to go to the limits of his imagination and persuasiveness, convincing Scotland Yard that Dr. Culverton Smith must be arrested and questioned. Though none of the serum had been found in his possession, what a boon to mankind that would have been, his personal notes and laboratories provided enough evidence that the danger was serious enough that the reluctant PM had finally assigned the fleet. But he had made it clear that if Holmes were wrong, both his career and that of his brother would be finished. Even criminal charges against them would not be out of the question. But these concerns were the last things on Holmes' mind as we relentlessly paced the deck, checking and rechecking the horizon for any signs of the hostile ship. It's too easy. Even now, as we stalk the prey, I'm filled with misgivings. Whatever for, Holmes? Surely Colonel Moran is no match for Her Majesty's Navy. Moran, though formidable, is not the opponent I fear. No, Watson, I speak of Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime. His network is worldwide, his contacts rival those of any government. Just when you think you have set your trap is when you must be on your closest guard. But mark my words, it has happened before. His brain is like a spider's web, spirals within spirals. Moriarty lives to spin that web, and he feels the slightest tremor at its periphery. You may rest assured he knows we are on the seas, and that he is somehow... Holmes paused, taking a lungful of tobacco smoke and letting it out slowly.
Yeah!
Somehow he is stalking us. Come now, Holmes, stalking the Royal Navy? You may laugh, Watson, but it is difficult to overestimate Moriarty's determination. One of the crewmen appeared with a couple of cups of tea, spiked with a tot of rum, saying the bridge thought we might appreciate a little refreshment. We thanked him and continued pacing. The tin cups were hot to the touch, so we rested them against a coil of rope. I looked out again into the calm sea, thinking that the tension of our voyage had affected Holmes's judgment. His respect for his arch-rival seemed exaggerated, bordering on the ludicrous. It occurred to me that expecting a long ocean voyage with little outside stimulation, he might have brought along some of his cocaine, which he occasionally injects when his overactive mind needs a secrete from boredom. The drug could have produced such paranoia. Lost in these thoughts, I absently took the cup of tea in my hand, blew on it, and sipped. Spit it out, Watson! Spit it out! Holmes was slapping me on the back, having dashed the cup to the deck. Poison. The tea has been poisoned. Are you all right? Shaking, my mouth already feeling a kind of dry numbness, though I had obeyed Holmes's command instantly, I turned to my friend. Where is that make? But the deck was filled with uniformed men, all indistinguishable from a distance. My legs seemed to be getting weaker, and it was becoming harder to focus, to recognize any of the men. Even Holmes appeared wavy and indistinct, as though I were looking at him from underwater. Then all went dark. I could feel strong fingers digging into my shoulder, pressing against the Jezeel bullet that had lodged there when I had been wounded in Afghanistan. I opened my eyes and an unfamiliar room swam before me. There was a hoarse whisper. Watson. The fingers gripped harder. Watson, can you hear me? I tried to bring the towering figure into focus in the darkened room. Holmes, where am I? You're alive. That's what's important. You very nearly weren't. It began to come back to me. The mate, the tea, my last memories before losing consciousness. What a fool I'd been to doubt Holmes. Once again, he'd been right. Moriarty's agents, it appeared, were here with us, even aboard this ship. Where are we now? What day is it? Why us, Holmes? Why poison us? Does he think we can make a difference when the entire Navy is out to get him? I rather fancy he thinks just that. Flattering, Groggily, I sat up. I wish I could take some pleasure in it, just now I'm too confused. Come, can you get up? Holmes took me by the arm and walked me about the small cabin. Outside, it appeared to be closing on dusk. After a few turns from wall to wall, I regained my sea legs and my mind cleared. What did I take? What was it? One of the cyanamides, I presume. You were extremely lucky, Watson. Even trace amounts can kill. You mustn't have swallowed any at all. The reason for this did not escape me for a moment. Once again, Sherlock Holmes had saved my life. As to how long you've been under, 30 hours is a reasonable estimate. And as you can see, night descends. He reached into his pocket and pulled forth most of a loaf of bread, some dried meat, and an orange. You must be hungry, and you'll need all of your strength. I packed this food myself as a precaution against just this sort of thing. 20 minutes later, we were again on the deck. I had naturally brought my revolver along, and now I gratefully felt its cold weight in my pocket. Shadow figures scattered here and there were swathing, stowing, making the vessel ship-shape for the night. Even armed, I was not without trepidation, knowing that one of these men had tried to kill us only the day before. It could easily happen again. Captain John Wagner approached. Ginger-haired and bearded, he was a sturdy sailor of the old school, hale, hearty, and profane. In spite of my accident, I felt safe within his domain. He ran the tightest of ships. Good evening, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, that such a thing should happen on my ship, I swear to you, we'll find the blackguard and I'll personally keyhole him. My best men are on it. You had us all right worried there, sir. Good to see you back up and about. I thanked him for his good wishes and struck up a conversation about our query. Tomorrow looks to be the day, doesn't it, Captain? That's your friend's estimate, Doctor, but it's a big ocean, hard to pinpoint a meeting date. Could happen any time. Could we miss him entirely? We won't miss him. And once we encounter the blighter, we'll bring him to. I'll stake my reputation on that. Throughout our discussion, Holmes had stood at the ship's rail, peering into the darkness. Who's at the wheel now, Captain? That'd be my first mate, Jeffers. And a lookout. Justifiably, I thought the captain's eyes narrowed. What's this all about, Mr. Holmes? Unless I'm very much mistaken, Captain, there's a ship running dark just off starboard. Wagner and I ran to the railing, squinting to make out a shape where Holmes had indicated. Before I had seen anything, the captain had turned, uttering a foul oath. As he rushed back to the bridge, his voice bellowing, "Battle stations!" shook the very timbers of the ship. We were the wedge of the armada, and within minutes, flares had alerted the rest of the fleet that something had been spotted. We had no way to be sure it was Colonel Moran, but the fact that the ship has its running lights covered was more than enough to convince me. Holmes stood beside me at the bow rail, his face sturdy in determination. Now remember, Watson, no one from that ship must be allowed to board. All its crew will have been inoculated against the plague, but there's no telling if any of the men are infested with fleas or lice that carry the disease. Are we to kill them all then? The men were fiends, but it was not like Holmes to be so cold-blooded. No, we'll shepherd them in their cargo of death to Garee, a small island in Dakar's harbor which used to hold slaves waiting for transport. Captain Wagner knows the drill. And then Moran and his crewmen can swim for it while we blow their ship out of the water. The salt water will leach away any of the vermin, and the men are all sailors. They'll have no trouble finding work. He was about to continue when we heard a shot somewhere behind us. I reached for my revolver and raced towards the sound, Holmes at my heels. Up here! Up here! It was Jeffers, the first mate, staggering to his feet on the bridge, his hands to his bleeding head. At his feet lay a prostrate Captain Wagner. The captain! Jeffers began. I was there beside him, but there was nothing I could do. Captain Wagner had a bullet hole in the back of his head. The gallant sailor had completed his last command. What happened? The mate appeared to be in shock. I don't know. I was hit from behind, and then, at the moment, the lookout shouted from above, "Enemy ship preparing to engage!" We looked over our shoulders, and there, its running light suddenly lit. A ship was bearing down on us on a collision course. Our crew at battle stations waited for the orders, but Jeffers seemed incapable of movement, watching horrified as the vessel approached. We can't let them engage. Holmes spoke calmly to Jeffers, but his voice cut like a knife. Think of your orders, man. On the deck of the enemy ship, we could see the crew manning their battle stations, with small arms and grappling hooks at the ready. These were the same men who had captured the deadly Boer pirates only 2 weeks before. Jeffers looked about in panic like a caged rat and then suddenly screamed to his own waiting crew, "Fire! Fire! Fire all guns! No!" Holmes yelled, but his voice was drowned out by the simultaneous roar of 14 cannons. Moran must have kept a magazine below decks, for no sooner had we recovered from the shock of the first rally than the night turned into day as the enemy ship less than 50 yards from us now exploded into a huge fireball. The force of the explosion knocked us off our feet, and we lay dazed for a moment in a shocking, deathly silence. And then, as though the brutality of what we'd just witnessed were not enough, a ghastly rain of burning timbers and flesh began to fall and litter our deck. The falling debris started several small fires, and Jeffers forced himself up to direct the crew. Holmes and I sat by Wagner's body and watched the floating remains of Moran's ship flare, then smoke as they slowly sank into the ocean. Holmes's eyes were glazed over, his elbows rested on his knees, his hands limp between them. Glancing first at me, then at the fallen captain, he sighed aloud. Wrong. Where could it have gone so wrong? There was no chance of sleeping. 8 bells in the third watch came and went, and still the crew kept at its cleaning duties. Jeffers had convened an officers' tribunal and ordered that every man account for his whereabouts at the time the captain had been murdered. One by one, the men filed in wearily into the captain's stateroom, resentful and edgy. Holmes stood silent at the railing, smoking. His hunched shoulders left no doubt that he carried the burden of the deaths of Moran's crewmen as though they were his own. I went to him. It could not be helped. He looked coldly at me. Holmes, it was not your fault. It was not supposed to be that way. No one had to die, and we never got the proof. But surely the fact that they intended to engage, it doesn't prove. Halloo! What's that? I looked out at the black ocean. A glint of phosphorus showed above, something moving in the water. Oh, what could that be? I asked. Holmes's dark eyes glinted in the light from his pipe. A kind of smile began to play at the corners of his mouth, and I recognized that look. He was on a scent when he thought it had eluded him. Then, at once, the half smile faded, replaced by a grimness I had never witnessed before in him. The monster. The unspeakable monster. Holmes, what? Follow me and keep your gun handy. He headed towards the bridge. Mate Jeffers, there is a boat in the water! The first mate, more haggard than ever, was struggling with the onus of command. He glared at Holmes as another interruption in an already impossible night. What's that you say, sir? There's a boat in the water, there at 45 degrees off port. The small boat could just barely be seen coming into the circle of the light of her own ship. My God! Jeffers seemed instantly rejuvenated, taking steps down from the bridge in bounding leaps. Could it be that someone survived? It would appear so. I glanced then at Sherlock Holmes, and he had in his eye a look so dangerous that even I, who knew him so well, shuddered. Yet I could not for the life of me see what had aroused him so. Questions formed in my mind, but the fierceness of his countenance forced me to hold my tongue. Jeffers called for some men and had them begin preparing for the rescue. Out in the night, I could just make out the lifeboat. On board was a single man, standing and waving, his "Ahoy!" small yet haunting carried across the water. In the boat with him appeared to be a large box of some sort. Probably, I thought, some possessions he'd managed to escape with before the ship exploded. As the boat approached, Jeffers leaned farther over the water to direct the crewmen's operations. Just at that moment, Holmes lurched forward, grabbed the mate from behind, and lifted him up and over the railing. With flailing arms and anguish, a cry, Jeffers hit the water with a tremendous splash. Holmes! There's no time to explain. Quick, what's in your weapon? In a flash, I'd drawn my revolver and leveled it at the crew members gathered around us. Holmes remained calm. I apologize for the inconvenience, gentlemen, and after a moment, it won't be necessary, but for now I think it better that no one try to save Mr. Jeffers. The mate rose to the surface, sputtering. Holmes! What's the meaning of this? It's mutiny! Watson! I'll have you both hanged! I think the pleasure will be the other way around, if you don't drown first. Why should I hang? First, for murdering Captain Wagner, then for blowing up Moran's ship, and not least for trying to poison Watson and me. You're mad! They were going to ram us! No, but for a moment it certainly did look that way, so that your disobedience of orders seemed logical. What are you saying? The convoy was to herd the ship to Garee, not destroy it. And no one at all, even a survivor, was to come aboard. Jeffers treaded water awkwardly. Fully dressed as he was, the weight of his clothes would pull him down within minutes. The lifeboat, all but forgotten by us, was drifting steadily away from him. Jeffers went under briefly and came up gagging. Looking at the lifeboat, he tried a few half-hearted breaststrokes in its direction, but the effort was too great for him. He turned back to us, breathing heavily. "Help me, Watson, and I'll see that you're pardoned." "If my friend hangs, I will gladly hang beside him." "You're not going to let him drown, are you?" "I rather think he'll be saved." But as I watched, Jeffers went under again. I thought the mate was gone, but once again he broke the surface. This time, the panic in his voice was not feigned. He looked up at Holmes, then across the water to the lifeboat, and came to his fateful decision. "Moran! Help me, I'm drowning!"
"You fool, Jeffers! Shut up!"
Sherlock Holmes addressed me, finally allowing himself a smile. "As I suspected, they know each other by name. It's all the proof we needed. You'd better see to Jeffers, Moran. The game is up."
"Who am I speaking to?"
"You don't recognize the voice, Colonel. We've met occasionally. Mr. Sherlock Holmes at your service."
"Holmes, what is this?"
"You thought I'd be dead by now, eh? Poisoned?"
"What are you talking about?"
"We had better discuss it after you've saved your accomplice." And indeed, Moran had set to with his oars. Before long, the exhausted mate had been pulled into the lifeboat.
"Now, in the name of decency, Holmes, let us aboard."
You have a great deal of gall using that word, Colonel. What is in that box behind you, sir? Moran uncovered a huge cage in which skulked something large and black, looking from our deck like a small bear.
"It's nothing more than a giant Sumatran tree rat, Holmes. I was taking it to the London Zoo. It was the only thing I could save from the ship."
"Before you blew it up?"
"What are you saying?"
"I'm saying you sacrificed your entire crew so that we would naturally pluck you and your giant rat of Sumatra from the lifeboat. You thought by now that Watson, Captain Wagner, and I would all be dead and that no one would think to question your rescue.
"No!"
That rat is infested with bubonic plague, and you yourself are host to its deadly carrier fleas. Both you and Jeffers are inoculated, but once you or the rat comes aboard this ship, the England we all love is gone." At the word plague, a general murmuring arose from the men behind us. Holmes turned and addressed them. "Yes, you heard me correctly. All your officers, including Jeffers, had been briefed. No one from Moran's ship was to board a British ship of the line. Would any of you let Moran and Jeffers aboard?"
"What should we do, sir?"
one of the men asked. "Run to the stateroom and ask the ranking officer to take control. Here, be off now." Holmes turned back to the lifeboat. "Drop the cage overboard, Moran, now." We could hear the vicious growls and squeals of the caged beast. It stalked back and forth, beady eyes fixed with the lights of our ship. Moran hesitated a moment, then reached behind him.
"Holmes, have pity!"
"Fire a shot into the boat, Watson." I did so. Holmes continued. "Colonel, you're going to have a hard time staying afloat with a hull full of bullets. Please, another, Watson, if you would." After the second shot, Moran quickly lifted the cage and dropped it into the black water. It sank like a stone, leaving no trace. One of the officers came running up.
"What's going on here, Mr. Holmes? Where is Mr. Jeffers?"
In a few dozen words, the situation had been explained.
"What should we do with these two men?"
"I should think that a lifeboat, if towed at a goodly distance behind us, would make for an interesting journey back to England. Both of the men should be deloused by the time we arrive." Back in our digs in Baker Street, Holmes put his feet up before the fire. We'd been back for nearly 3 weeks and the trials of Moran and Jeffers were coming up. Yet there were still elements unclear to me. When did you know exactly? Holmes exhaled a heavy Cavendish smoke. "I believe I have mentioned before, Watson, that when all other possibilities have been exhausted, whatever remains, however implausible, must be the truth. As soon as I saw the lifeboat in the water, a conjecture occurred to me. No lifeboat could have survived that explosion. Therefore, it had been lowered before the explosion. It follows, then, that the explosion was planned. When Jeffers did not hesitate to try to bring the survivor aboard, I surmised that he was in on the plot. Of course, I had to risk mutiny to prove it, but Jeffers' involvement was the only thing that fit all the facts. But he was bleeding when they came upon him and Captain Wagner. Nothing is more convincing and easier to self-inflict than a superficial head wound. And, my poisoning? The crewman said that the tea was from the bridge. We both assumed that he meant from the captain. But a man of Captain Wagner's personality would imprint it on his men, and if he had personally sent the drinks, the crewman would have said, "Captain Wagner sent his compliments," or something like that. Well, now that you explain it, it all seems so clear. Don't punish yourself, my friend. Neither of us saw it at the time. It was not until I saw Moran in the lifeboat that I was forced to reconsider the smallest events in the chain. The fire burned low. And what, finally, of Professor Moriarty? I asked. Holmes sighed. Not Moran, nor Jeffers, nor Culverton Smith will implicate him. For the present we foiled him, but I fear Moriarty and I must await another confrontation. And what then? I asked, looking into my friend's troubled face. Sherlock Holmes gazed glassy-eyed into the fire. And then, Watson? Then one of us must surely die.